Worldwide, 100 million people use Khan Academy every year. In 2012, Sal was recognized by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. As of today, the Khan Academy videos have been viewed almost 2 billion times. Sal, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed viewing your conversation at this conference last year with my predecessor, Brenna Pangilinan, and you are quite a critic of how school systems measure student success and advance students. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Zaid. But yeah, the general thing that I've always been talking about, and these aren't really my ideas, we've just helped popularize them or maybe help build some tools to make them a little bit more realistic, is in a traditional academic model, which we've all grown up in and some of us are still in. Your students are all moved in a fixed pace. Let's say you're in middle school and the class is covering basic exponents. You have some homework, you come into class, homework, class, and then after a couple of weeks, you get a test. And then on that test, maybe you get a 90%, I get an 80%, one of our friends gets a 70%. And even though that test has identified gaps, even the A or B student, what was that 10% that you didn't know, the whole class will then move on to the next concept, usually something that builds on those gaps. It might be now negative exponents or logarithms or something else. And this process keeps occurring throughout our entire academic lives. And it occurs in every subject, but in math, it's probably most pronounced that if you didn't fully master decimals, fully master negative numbers, fully master exponents, and then you're in an algebra class and you have to see that, well, things might not make sense. And a lot of times it's not even that even if you got 100% on the original exam, we also know people forget things. We know that there are things like the summer slide where your muscles kind of atrophy. And then all of a sudden, if those gaps form, then you're going to be in tough shape. And every teacher knows that in a classroom of 30 kids, those 30 students have different needs, different gaps to fill. They're ready to learn at different paces. Every ed school has always talked about differentiation being the best practice, but it's very hard to do logistically if you're just one teacher in a room of 30 students. And so what's interesting about the world we now live in, where you have technology, you have tools like Khan Academy, we don't have to have a compromise anymore. We could have a world where one teacher with 30 students can actually allow all 30 students to work on what's most important for them, to fill in gaps if they have gaps, build a strong foundation, and then move ahead at a pace that's appropriate for them. And the situation is, we know what the status quo is doing. 70% of young people who go to community college have to take remedial math. Remedial math is not 11th or 12th grade math. It's middle school math. The community colleges are saying that you're not even ready to learn algebra yet. College algebra is really just 9th or 10th grade math. And so what we're seeing is year after year, and the numbers at four-year colleges aren't much better. Year after year, kids are promoted, 70% here, 80% there. Even when they get to 100%, they might forget a little bit. Those gaps accumulate. You get to college, they say you're not even ready to learn algebra yet, much less things are more advanced. And we see that in almost any subject. If I were to ask most of y'all, if I were to give you a final exam from a class that even when you did well in last year, I think many students, cram, perform, and forget, which sometimes is okay, but a lot of times it leaves your foundations not where they are. So, one thing I've been preaching for a long time, and the pandemic, I think, has only accelerated this, is instead of holding fixed when and how long you have to learn something with a variable outcome, A, B, C, D, F, do it the other way around. What should be variable is you get as much time and opportunities and incentives to fill in your gaps and learn at your own time and pace. And what's fixed is that eventually every student should get to that real mastery.
Awesome. Thank you so much for kind of elaborating on that. One question, because we have so many questions coming in. One question is, if everyone were to proceed kind of at their own pace, do you think that this model works better, or is there evidence that one way works better than the other? Or I just want to hear kind of your thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, first of all, the status quo, as I mentioned, almost all American kids are taking 7th grade math, 8th grade math, algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2. Then most of them are taking pre-calculus. Some of them are even taking calculus. And then you get to college, and the great majority of these students are being told, you're not even ready to learn algebra yet. And so what that tells you has been happening is that year after year, students are getting promoted. They're cramming, they're memorizing formulas, but they're getting promoted with gaps in their understanding. They're not really mastering a lot. Their foundations get weaker and weaker as they're going. And then only once they're in 12th, or I guess you could say 13th grade, people are saying, wait, let's go back and fill in. And you can imagine that's incredibly frustrating for everyone that's involved. It's incredibly frustrating for the student to say, wow, I have to go back 6 years to do this foundation. And if someone just spent a little bit more time with me in sixth or seventh grade, my foundations would have been that much better. Not only would I have placed into college algebra, I would place out of college algebra. I should place out of college pre-calculus. I should place out of college calculus. There's no reason why every student in the country can't do that. Now, there's been 50 efficacy studies on Khan Academy, and we see consistently that if students are able to put in even 45 minutes a week of personalized practice, that can grow them 20 or 30% more than expected. And that's only about 20% of their time that they're doing math. And even when I saw those numbers initially, I was like, wow, that's better than I expected. But it just shows you how much, and we've all experienced this. There's studies that the average teacher will teach to the 22nd percentile. But even the 22nd percentile is actually only really serving kind of 1%, right? It's serving people who are right at the 22nd percentile. People who are there's 78% of the kids who are feeling that that's too slow for them. And then you have 21% of the kids that feel that that's too fast for them. And so it's not being, and it's not the teacher's fault. And teachers try to make their lessons so they can capture as much as they can around that 22nd or 23rd percentile. But clearly it's going to, some kids are just bored. Some kids are lost, and it's not always the same kids. I think we've all experienced that especially in a math or science class, where one day you're bored, you're like, oh, I know all of this, and you kind of check out, and then the next, wait, when did this happen? and then all of a sudden, wait, why are we going so fast? I need to make sure I understand this. And so that's where the variability. But there's a ton of efficacy studies behind it. Benjamin Bloom, if anyone's curious, you could look at Benjamin Bloom's 2 Sigma study, where he showed that if you work in a mastery learning environment where you get as many shots at goal as necessary to master something, that in the right context, you can actually have a 2 standard deviation improvement, which is dramatic. That's taking someone from the 50th percentile to the 95th percentile. So there's a lot of evidence, and it's really, and every teacher intellectually agrees with this. The hard part is, how do we change workflows and some of the grading and the transcript so this becomes more mainstream?
One of our anonymous attendees just asked, what do you think is the biggest challenge of the US education system right now? And what is the most attractive system or most attractive aspect of this system that impels the success of the development of talented people in different areas of society?
Good question. I think, well, one of the things that is what I just talked about, which isn't just the U.S. education, it's the global education system, works in that more traditional way, which really did come out of the Industrial Revolution. Like when we decided to have mass public education, that was a massively utopian idea and has done a lot of good in the world, but we had to make compromises if we're going to educate students in batches of 30. And one of the compromises is we do the same thing to every student, lockstep, kind of like a factory. So that's one thing. I would move more to a mastery-based system, more to a competency-based model. Competency-based model is, it doesn't matter when or how long it took you to learn something. What matters is, have you learned it and are you retaining the material? Mm-hmm. But the other things I would look at, what I'm worried about in the US is it really is there's pockets of real amazing excellence where students are getting the resources, they have access to devices, they have access to a really rigorous coursework. And then we know that there's large pockets where they don't have access to all of those. And so you really do see a divergence. Even when you look at, I know there's always a lot of hand wringing when the PISA scores come out, and the US is always someplace in the middle. And the real story is that the US is almost a bimodal distribution, where if you were to take the top quartile of US schools, they can compete or do better than anyone, even if they haven't gone to mastery learning and all of these types of things. And then the bottom quartile of US schools they really are struggling. I also always point out, these aren't really fair comparisons to compare. When we compare US to Finland, which is the size of the Bay Area, or we compare it to Singapore, which is a city state, it's not a fair comparison to compare 300 something million. And even when we compare it to China, it's not really compared to China. It's not like every kid in China is taking these tests. You're really comparing it to the kids in Shanghai whom the Chinese government feels comfortable with taking these tests. So that's where I'm always a little bit in defense of the US, but I do think we as a country can do a lot better. Now, the one thing that I think we don't want to forget, or that we want to really double down in, I always meet ministers of education from some of the countries that are, the top 5, top 10 of the PISA rankings, and they come out to Silicon Valley, they'll come to Google's offices, they'll come to Facebook, they'll come to our offices, and they'll ask, well, we're doing everything right in terms of test scores, but it feels like the US still has a lot more innovation. It feels like more startups are happening here, more innovation is happening here. And what I point out is, I think globally, test scores are one thing and they're important, but this notion of entrepreneurialism and not destigmatizing failure, these are incredibly powerful, which I think it's a spectrum throughout the world. I don't want to make it sound completely be an American exceptionalist, but America is, I still believe, one of the places where entrepreneurialism is strongest, where failure is not stigmatized the way it is in other countries, where other people are willing to take bets on a good idea, and someone who seems to have a lot of energy. And I think that type of culture, if we can bring that into the school system, and they're related, because right now when a student gets an 80% and we tell them you're a C student, we're stigmatizing failure, or we're stigmatizing not excellence. But if we said, hey, you're at 80% now, or you're at 60% now, you're failed for now, keep working at it, we believe that you can get to 90 or 100%. That's the same thing that you tell someone when they try to start a business. And if they fail the first time, you're like, you're not a bad human being, you just failed. That's awesome. That's how you learn. This is all about growth mindset. Keep working at it. And it's only cultures like that you're going to have a lot of innovation.
I definitely, a few things actually. First, you mentioned Finland. One of our earlier speakers today, Mary Perry, also mentioned Finland and how awesome of an education system they have. But to be honest, kind of like what you were saying, I haven't heard of any Facebooks coming out of Finland. So I definitely think that they don't have the same kind of care for innovation that we do here in the US. But another question from Kaylin, who asks, how does the Khan Academy we know today differ from the one that you imagined earlier on, or even before COVID?
So I think the vision has stayed remarkably constant. Our mission as a not-for-profit is free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And then the vision is, can we create a world where, first of all, anyone on the planet has access to all of the core academic learning from pre-K through the core of college. And that learning could be practice, feedback, assessment, instruction. Arguably, the only way to make it free and accessible is to do it online, which is why we've invested so much on that. And so we are serious about covering all of those grades, all of those subject areas. Our second pillar is, if we're going to deliver it to people, let's see if we can, to some degree, leapfrog traditional mechanisms. So that's what we've been talking about for the last several minutes. Can we allow the students to have the content personalized around them? Can we work with teachers so that the classroom can fundamentally be more student-centered? Can we support teachers as they support 30 kids who are all at different levels to make sure they master their learning? And then the third pillar is, how do we connect all of this learning to real opportunities in the world? Can we create credentials? Can we create badges that matter, that have real meaning in the broader world? That hasn't changed before the pandemic, during the pandemic, after the pandemic. What has changed is the pandemic accelerated a lot of that. So, for example, we're accelerating a lot of our science content. We've always had science. I'm sure a lot of y'all have used it, but by this time next year, we should have fully fleshed out at the same level of detail that we have in math, middle school, high school, early college science, all of the sciences, biology, chemistry, physics, econ, earth science, all of the environmental science, all of the above. So it's accelerated content like that. We are constantly trying to improve the engagement of the system. We have a big roadmap of stuff that we're gonna be building, tools for teachers and for students. One thing that I launched last year from the pandemic, pandemic was the proximate cause, but I've always wanted to do it, is a way for people to help each other, not just learn from Khan Academy. And so I started a new not-for-profit, but very complementary to Khan Academy, called schoolhouse.world. And this is a place where you can get free tutoring. And the way we're able to do free tutoring is that we have high quality vetted volunteers who are able to run small group tutoring sessions. And I want to encourage all of y'all who are in high school or early college, especially late high school, check it out. You can get help on schoolhouse.world, but you can also give help on schoolhouse.world. And actually, as you certify yourself to be a tutor in different subjects and build your reputation as a tutor, University of Chicago already announced, and they've already been admitting students based on their cred, their reputation as tutors in schoolhouse.world. And in the next few months, we're going to see a couple of more highly selective universities like University of Chicago also say that, yes, this is something that we really care about. So it could be a good way to do community service that really leverages your skills and matters to colleges.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Sal. Taking kind of a step back into your childhood, is there anything that you really wish that you told your high school self pertaining to education? And if so, could you share it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stock picks I would have told high
Uh,
school Sal to. No, but in all seriousness, um, if I really could give one piece of advice to the high school version of myself is to chill out a little bit. Um, I think when you're a teenager, college, early stages of your career, you feel so anxious about making your life matter, or to find your lane, so to speak.
mhm.
There's so much. I used to play it cool with my friends, and I was externally pretty laid back, uh, but I was very internally stressed about what I was going to do with my life. I remember in college I must have switched majors 4 or 5 times. One day I wanted to go into med school, next day I wanted to go to law school. I was like, what am I going to figure? I have to figure it all out sooner than later. And it's good to have a little bit of that angst. A little bit of that angst gives you energy to go ask people questions, try things out, work a little bit harder. But I think I probably had a little bit too much. And I think, frankly, most young people who are aspiring, I'm guessing most of the folks listening today are probably in this bucket. Y'all are all very much probably like I was at your age. Just remind yourself, if you just keep putting yourself out there, keep putting yourself out of your comfort zone, uh, t- be very open with people, ask them questions, be very curious, and this always just do the next right thing. Then things will work out. The extra stress above that, it's really not fully worth it. Little bouts of stress are okay, but that chronic stress or that chronic anxiety isn't going to help. If anything, it might keep you from stepping out of your comfort zone. It might deplete energy from you that could be used towards exploring certain paths in your life. So that would be my biggest one. And if I want to make it very tangible, this is something I've only discovered in the last 5 or 6 years. I highly recommend meditation in whatever form you want to take it. But just to be able to 5, 10, 30 minutes a day, sit down, try to still your thoughts, be in the present. It does wonders in terms of just, I think, making you happier, having more positive energy around others. And whatever life throws at you, and life is going to throw some weird stuff at you, you're more likely to be resilient and just take it, learn from it, and then keep moving.
Would Khan Academy ever consider having meditation courses or meditation videos?
I made a few. I
Oh,
think if you
okay.
do a search for Khan Academy guided meditation, you'll find it. I didn't want to like, yeah. I might do more. I don't think you need me to do a guided meditation. I might do it for kicks, but and I remember when I was younger, I did try it. I'm like, what is this whole meditation thing? And I didn't, and I'm like, okay, I'm sitting here silent. And I just thought I didn't have the time for it. I just thought, like, I don't get it. But what you realize is I turned to it probably about 5, 6 years ago when I was feeling a lot of stress. I have a family and Khan Academy and all the other stuff going on in life. And I just found that it just made me enjoy what I was doing much more, made me much more present. And it is a cumulative effect. You think when you just sit there silently and try to still your thoughts for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, that it's not doing anything. But if you slowly observe, you're going to find out that you're going to have better energy. You're less likely to be frustrated and angry or triggered. You're not going to jump at people. And then after you do that for a few months, you're going to feel, you're going to sleep better. You're just going to be in a better place.
Definitely. Sarah asked a really, really good question here. So on the State Board of Education, we use kind of testing and test scores to really kind of inform our perspective. And so Sarah asks, do you think that standardized tests should be continued or should they be discontinued?
Yeah, my view on this, I know it's a hot topic, is when people say they're against standardized testing, I always say, which part are you against, the testing or the standardization? I think to get to know where you are at anything and to get better at anything, you have to know where you are. So that means some form of measurement or assessment. And I think we'd all agree that it's better if it's standardized than not, because if it's not standardized, how do you compare? How do you know that that's a true candle, so to speak, of what you're getting? Now, I think some of the controversy around it is it being used in the right way? Is it creating negative externalities? Is it creating a testing only culture? Are some things that are harder to measure but are just as important or even more important, or those get slipping through the cracks? Are we leveraging the tests in good ways? I think those are all important questions. Right now, a lot of times people give a standardized test and there's a lot of time and energy put into it, but then people aren't really making use of the information. Like, okay, you're the 80th percentile. What now? Or you got to, what now? It should be actionable. It's just say, why don't you keep working on this so that you can get better, so that the next time you take this test, I think there's going to be new ways of assessment that aren't necessarily everyone take the day off and do, spend X hours doing a Scantron. I think there could be standardized tests. Khan Academy itself, the practice, it is standardized assessment. It's the practice does measure whether you know the material or not, and it is standardized. We're giving the same types of exercises and content to anyone on the platform. So I think that there could be new forms of assessment going forward that are more continuous. As I mentioned, some universities are looking at how good of a tutor are you on schoolhouse.world. And that is a form of standardized community service assessment. If you're able to tutor calculus on schoolhouse.world, you clearly know your calculus, and you have empathy, you have communication skills, which are harder to measure through traditional test scores. We've also been experimenting as part of the certification process. What if a student takes an assessment on Khan Academy while they record their screen, while they record their face, while they speak their reasoning out loud? That's really interesting to colleges, because it's very hard to cheat there, very hard to fake it, and it's tackling other capabilities outside of, can you just solve the math problem? Can you communicate? Can you articulate your thinking? Things like that. So my view is you're going to see more variety of standardized tests. I think certain types of standardized tests might work better for certain people. I'm always a big fan of flexibility. Certain people, SAT might be awesome. Other people, it might stress them out so much, but they're still very high potential. And if they can show that some other way, great. But I definitely don't think the world is better off if you take them away. People forget, if you go back 100 years before the SAT existed, the only way, to get into a elite school, you had to go to elite high school that the elite colleges knew about. And I grew up in Metairie, Louisiana, at a fairly unknown high school, public high school. There's no way that I would have been able to go to the Northeast for colleges, and if I didn't have access to a standardized test to show that I'm as capable as some of the kids that you are graduating from some of the fancier schools that people know about. So I think they're very important. It's just we shouldn't over-index on them. We should realize that people are more than just their test scores. We have to think about ways to measure other things, and we should have some optionality because certain tests aren't always great for all people.
So your perspective is more so not kind of leaning all the way in on them, but kind of using them to as like a component of an evaluation of someone, if it's for like an application or just to see kind of where they're standing in like a course or a subject or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And once again, it's someone might have bombed the SAT, but they are able to and this happens already. They do well on the AP test, or maybe they're able to become a tutor on schoolhouse.world, or maybe some other thing, they can go win a science competition. These are all forms of standardized assessment, if you really think about it, in the purest form. And so, and that, I think colleges do look at that way. They don't just define you by your SAT scores. But they at the same time have found that some of these scores do, SAT and ACT scores or AP scores, they do correlate when taken in conjunction with grades and other things to how ready you are for college and things like that. But they take them with a grain of salt, which I think is healthy.
A specifically important question for kind of the time that we're in right now. Salvador asks, what do you recommend for students struggling to stay motivated after being drained by online school during this pandemic?
Good question. I don't know all of your context, Salvador. My advice, well, you have summer now. I think if you put in an hour or two a day over the summer and obviously Khan Academy is there for you, especially on the math and science side. You could use other resources for other subjects. But if you put in 20, 30 minutes, an hour a day, up to 2 hours a day, just learning at your own pace, mastering concepts, getting up to speed. You're going to be in really, really good shape when you get to next year, whether it's high school or college or wherever you're heading to. You're going to be very well prepared, and you're going to find that that's going to be a much easier transition going back to school. I think if you are in some type of learning program still, even over the summer, just make sure that you're able to get time outside, get your, I sense of, I try to do as many of my meetings as possible walking around the neighborhood. I find that the blood flow actually helps me focus, gives me fresh air. It helps me recharge. Try to do that as much as possible. I think the mind body thing is more is you can't overstate how valuable that is. And I'd meditate. Whenever I'm feeling burnt out, no matter, I just like take time, I meditate, and 10-20 minutes later, it's like a reboot. I feel much lighter, and I'm ready to take on whatever I need to take on.
Awesome. A lot of students are obviously curious about how you got started with Khan Academy. And so I'm just going to ask you kind of what do you think your first big break was with Khan Academy? Was it like a venture investment, or was it kind of just something that happened along the way? Or
Oh, there's a bunch. I think the first big break was when I tutored my cousin Nadia in 2004, once she needed the tutoring, and that it was working, and that she actually retook a standardized test that her middle school had, and it replaced her into a faster math track. So I'm like, okay, that definitively worked for her. Mm-hmm. And then I started working with her younger brothers, and then, word spread in my family, free tutoring is going on. And so that kind of spread out, and I felt like I was onto something, and I started writing software for them, and they found it valuable. I had written many types of software many times in my life before that. No one found any of it valuable. So just that was incredibly exciting. I think, making those first lessons on YouTube, and then getting feedback, not just from my cousins, but from random people I never knew, that it was helping them. I consider that a break of sorts. But in terms of the traditional break, I quit my day job in 2009. I was originally an analyst at a hedge fund to work on this full time as a not-for-profit, trying to get the philanthropic funding. That first year was super tough. Anytime you do anything entrepreneurial, things always happen a little bit slower than you expect. But we were living off of savings. Our first child had been born. My wife was a medical resident, so she was making a little bit, but we were digging into savings. And it was a $10,000 donation came in after about 9 months, which wasn't going to change my life, but it was very heartening that someone gave that much. But her name was Ann Doerr, and they're very prominent philanthropists. Her husband, John, is a very famous venture capitalist. And so they were the first to really believe in Khan Academy. And I remember after that first meeting with her, when she learned that I wasn't supporting myself, I got a text message when I came home, and Ann wrote, "You really need to be supporting yourself. I've just wired you $100,000. So that was a good day, a little bit. And then it was only a month or two later that I was running a summer camp for middle school students, and I was running a trading floor. It's a fun game. And I started getting text messages from Ann, which you can imagine I now take very seriously. And she said that she was in the Aspen Ideas Festival in a big conference. Bill Gates was on stage being interviewed, and he just was randomly talking about how much he loves Khan Academy. This was back in the day that like no one knew what Khan Academy, and Bill Gates is like in front of this huge audience publicly talking about how he uses it himself, how he uses it with his kids. And that was kind of mind blowing. And then a few weeks later, I could tell you the whole story of, but I had a chance to meet with Bill, and they became supporters. Google.org became supporters. So those were all breaks. The TED Talk that I gave in 2011 really increased people's understanding that Khan Academy isn't just this software nonprofit, that we have a view on education, a lot of what we've just talked about. But there's just been so many things that have fallen under play. I somewhat joke. I wouldn't be viewed as a credible person if I didn't say it's a joke, but I tell the team at Khan Academy that it feels like there are benevolent aliens that are leveraging Khan Academy to prepare humanity for first contact. And there's aliens are out there just kind of getting into Bill Gates's mind, getting into Ann and John Doerr's mind, making sure that we had a place at TED in 2011. But because that's what education does do. If they are out there and we need to make contact, they probably want to make contact with a humanity that has, a little bit better critical thinking skills and is ready for it.
That's a hilarious story, but it's so interesting to hear kind of all those steps that you have to take along the way to get to where you are today. This is a conference for student leaders of ASBs, PTAs, and just a variety of other organizations. And so, what do you think student leaders should do to change the way that education works in their schools?
Oh, it's a great question. And I actually would love to continue this conversation with y'all, more systemically, but I can imagine if either part of the existing organizations that y'all are running or create new organizations, that imagine if there was either as part of the math club or the honor society or something, or student council, a systematic way where y'all are able to volunteer tutoring on schoolhouse.world. And then you're also able to publicize to your peers, hey, this is where you can get tutoring as well. That will start to change things. And then you can show the faculty, hey, this is helping our friends. Can we make this a more formal part of the thing? Same thing with Khan Academy. Whether or not your school has adopted it or is using it formally, all of y'all are actually ready to start using it tomorrow. You can start running programs, either at your school or, if there's a middle school or if there's a school that doesn't have as many resources, run programs where you're able to leverage Khan Academy, where you're able to make sure that students are able to engage 20, 30 minutes a day. Maybe it's over the summer, maybe it's over breaks, where right now there's a big gap and where a lot of people could benefit. But I would love to, I think there's a huge opportunity for young people like yourselves to take the initiative and do this type of thing.
Awesome. Zuriel asks, oftentimes, we compartmentalize students into being students who are book smart, or for a better term, test or grade smart. What do you have to say about students that have good grades but are bad at life skills? And how do you suggest that students balance both, or have both, I guess, or learn both?
Yeah, I generally think they're both important, super important. And there's no reason why why anyone shouldn't have both. You're gonna suffer in one way or the other, or you might suffer. Hopefully you don't, but your chances of suffering go down dramatically if you're able to have reasonable proficiency in both. If you're someone that you've either stereotyped yourself or other people have stereotyped you as book smart, first of all, don't let that stereotype stick to you. Realize that you're a full human being. And there's no reason, start asking questions. Ask your parents how they're managing the finances. Go see if you can get out into the real world and volunteer some places, get an internship, see how the world works, invest your money, get a small stock portfolio going, understand how real estate works. If your parents are renting, understand what is in the lease. If you're buying, understand how the mortgage is structured. All of these things, incredibly. Learn to cook, very valuable. Meditate, I think, helps on both. And if you're someone who's like, well, I'm from the school of hard knocks, I have a lot of life skills, but the tests and stuff not for me. Once again, that's your ego talking. Your ego is actually trying to protect you from stuff that you think you're not good at, because your ego is afraid that if you get data point that you're not good at, your ego is like, oh, I'm not good at this. Our ego, all of us, we all have egos, and it all gets us into trouble. What you want to do is step out of your comfort zone and say, ego, the only way we are going to collectively get better is if we try things that right now are a little bit difficult for us. And I think in academics, people shy away from it because of what we talked about. They got labeled as a C student. They got labeled as a D student. And so they don't want to go back there. But if we can start signaling that, no, you just happen to be at that state at that time, keep working on it. There's no end to how far you can get to. Hopefully we'll get fewer people who are afraid to engage.
Okay. We have time for just one more question, but this has been completely spectacular. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day once again. But Jivan asks, what do you think is the best way to find out what career or pathway you want to take in life for the future?
That's a good question. I would say ask a lot of people a lot of questions, and don't be afraid to be nosy. And most people are really happy if someone takes interest in their life. Like meet, you could talk to professors, but professors are going to have a lot of knowledge, but they're going to have a knowledge according to their own track and what they have seen. So try to find recent grads, either from your high school or especially people who are early in the workforce, and ask them about this. What do you like about your job? What do you not like about your job? How much do you get paid? What's your actual take home pay? Do you have regrets about this? Do you wish you did something different? And you'll find that if you keep asking questions, people are going to be pretty honest. Ask people in their 30s, 35, 40 years old, 45 years old, what they wish they would have done. And then you'll get a pretty good sense of it. And then, of course, you cross that with what you're really engaged with in school. But, the big caveat, I think a lot of y'all know, is sometimes what you do in school or the coursework is not always what you do, is not the same that you do it in the career. But for me, I always knew when I graduated from high school, I was entranced by math and physics, and I thought I wanted to understand. I still want to understand the nature of reality, and I said, I'll be a physicist, because it felt like the purest thing to do. And then when I got to college, actually a little bit before college, I started getting into computers as well, and I was like, wow, with computer science, you can create realities, you can do things at a scale that were very difficult before. And so I got intrigued by that. And I said, okay, maybe I'll go into tech in some way. But at the same time, I took the MCAT, thought I was going to go into med school. Actually, I didn't take it. I taught the MCAT for Princeton Review to prepare for the MCAT. But I took the LSAT. I thought I was going to be a lawyer at one point. But, you just put one foot in the other. When I was my senior year in college, a friend of mine got a job at Oracle, and they were paying more than I thought they were going to pay people. And I was like, well, that could be a good way to pay down my debt. And so you go take that, and that had some good things, some not so good things about it. So I got to believe everyone's going to take a meandering journey. What I would say is never tie your identity or your ego to just one thing, because then that sets you up for failure if that one thing were to go away. So always, no matter what job you're doing, leave a little bit of space for you to tinker, leave a little bit of space for you to pursue your passions, to have a little bit more of a holistic life. And you don't know where things will take you. But I think it's amazing how few people ask questions. Like when they pick a major in college, they don't really know what percentage of that major 5 years out of college, they have a job. What does the job look like? And don't be afraid to ask, nosy questions. How much do you get paid? You can't discount that.
Definitely.
How happy are you? Are you stressed? Are you whatever? All of these things.
Definitely. Well, Sal, this has been just an absolutely splendid conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been like a huge honor and just like a dream come true to be able to meet you and to have this conversation with you. And thank you so much for being such a important part of all of our academic journeys. We won't take up too much of your time, though.
No, well, honored to be part of this, and glad to do this, Zaid, and to all of y'all, great questions. And I'm serious. I think there's so much that y'all could do, both for yourselves on your journeys, but if y'all drive some of these ideas, actually, that's how the change could happen in the system.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Sal. We hope you have an awesome day.
Thanks, everyone.